Hi, this is Edward Troxel. In this tutorial we're going to start a new series and look to see how we can determine if there are silent areas on a track and get rid of those silent areas. There's no direct way in Vegas to see the audio levels on any event, and so we're going to have to get a little creative in how we do that. So let's see what options we have available to us to figure out how to determine silent areas, even though we don't have access to that information, and we don't want to use third-party code as well. So we want to do everything direct in the scripting that Vegas has available to us. So let's take a look at Vegas and see what options are available to us. The best option I could find available is when you go to render. And when you go to render, I'm just going to render out to an MP3 file, because that's a very fast way of rendering. Then when you go under these render options, we actually have a check mark here called Save Loudness Log File next to Media File. So we're going to check that box, and let's do a quick render and see what happens to this project I have open. So as you can see, it's a very fast render. It took under 4 seconds to finish. And now let's look at the files that it created. Here's the MP3 file it created, and then here is the loudness file it created. It's a text file, and if we open it, we will see that it has a time code and a volume level. And the time code keeps going up with the volume levels. Then as we go forward, notice it was minus infinity all the way to 1.5 seconds. So if we come here and look at our timeline, we will see that at 1.3 seconds is where our audio clip started. So apparently there wasn't much noise in it until the 1.5 second mark. As you can see, it begins very quiet. And then speaking starts. And that speaking starts at about 6.2 seconds. So if we go back to our log, notice we're at very soft, minus 58, minus 50, minus 46. And then when we get to the 6 second mark, you will see we suddenly jump to minus 24, minus 21, minus 19, and so we are much louder in this area. And then once that little bit of the section of speaking ends, notice it goes back down to the minus 50 range. So we can actually use this time code and this volume information to determine the volume level that we want to use. The problem is we have to generate the loudness file to begin with, and then we have to figure out how to read this text file to get these two pieces of information scattered amongst all this other information, plus these headers and the header at the top, which is all this information here, which needs to be skipped. And then there's also some information at the bottom that we will skip. Basically, once we hit this line of dashes, we're just going to stop reading this file. So let's see how we can do that. For this script, I've put a renderer in here, which I've just defined here and set to null, and then the render template, which once again I've defined and set to null. Then in our main routine, the first thing I'm going to do is find renderers. So let's look at the find renderers routine. Here's the find renderers routine. I just set it to void because it's going to set those two variables up there. And then I put these inside of a try catch just to make sure if there's any error that happens, it's not going to just crash the program. But the main part of this routine is the for each renderer in myvegas.renderers, and then I'm looking specifically for the MP3 renderer, which is this GUI ID. And we get that from the effects GUI ID that we got from our read GUI ID script that we wrote many tutorials ago. And so when we look in here, we went down to our renderers and we wanted our MP3 renderer, which is right here, and I just picked this preset right here, which also has a separate GUI ID. So this is the ID we're looking for the renderer name, and then this is the GUI ID we're looking for the template name. So back over here, after we find the renderer, for each render template in the renderer templates, I'm going to check to make sure that this is a valid renderer template, and then I'm looking specifically for this GUI ID to also match. So that will get me the correct renderer, which I am setting into my renderer, and the correct template, which I'm setting into render template. Once again, we define these up here. So now that I have the renderer that I want to use, I need to render it out to a file. So I've created me two strings here, and I've just hard-coded these file names. First of all, I'm putting it in the temporary files folder, and then I'm just calling it temp.mp3, and then I know that if this file name is temp, the log file is going to be temp_loud.txt. And so by hard coding this to temp, I know that this can also be hard coded as well. So now I have the temp file and the temp log. Now I'm going to go through each of my Vegas tracks. Now remember that normally we would have multiple audio tracks when we're wanting to do this. Right now, for this test, I'm just assuming I have the one audio track. We will talk about that later. But for right now, we just have the one audio track. And so if it is the audio track, then I'm going to render the temp file. And so let's go down and look at the render temp file code. Here's the render temp file code. First thing I'm going to do is set up my arguments. And the arguments are going to be defined as the output file, which is the temp file name, which I passed to this routine. Then the render template I got from the variable up above. The starting time, I'm just going to start it from timecode 0. The render length, I'm setting it to the project length. I do not need to include the marker, so I just set that to false. I do not need to stretch to fill, since I'm not even doing video, so I just set that to false. But I do need to generate loudness log, so I set that equal to true. And then we're going to get the status of the render from myvegas.render, and we pass it the args that we just created. So with these arguments, it's given it the temp file name, it's given it the render template, it's told it to create the loudness log, and so now this will do that render. Now back up here in our main routine, after that gets done, we're going to have to process that temp log. We'll look at that in the next tutorial. And then once it finishes processing that log, we're going to want to delete those two files. I'm going to leave that commented out for right now so that we can run this and see the files that are actually created. So let's run the script now. So it created the files, and if we come and look in our temp folder, we will see that we have a temp.mp3, and then we have our temp loudness log, and this is what it generated for us. And it should be exactly the same as the other one we looked at when we manually did it the first time. So if we go down to 6.5 seconds, you will see that it jumped from -57 to 24, just like it did previously. This is a start in getting the loudness information. At least now we can go through and it will create the loudness information on the audio, and we will know where that information is located. Now all we have to do is learn how to read that information and be able to process it in such a way that we can use it. And then, of course, we'll turn on those file deletes once we're done, so that those files will be removed from the system, so that when we're done with them, they're no longer there because they're no longer needed. So tune in to the next tutorial and we'll continue on this. Let me know if you have any questions, any tutorials you'd like to see. Leave me some comments. Let me know what you think of these tutorials. And we'll see you in the next tutorial. Please sign up at www.jettv.com and subscribe on YouTube to get further notifications on when new videos are presented.